As I'm sure you know, we're going to talk today about how I started my company as a single mom. Now, I do have to preface this with saying this talk has gone through a couple different versions. It did initially start as more the typical thing you might expect, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that's not really going to be valuable because it wouldn't really be honest to how I actually did it, and I don't think you'd learn much from that. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to take you through maybe a little different version of the talk. I'm Sayre. I am the CEO and technical founder of SkillSaige. But I'm also a single mom, a game developer, an artist, and a storyteller. And the first thing I want to start off with today is the idea that real is often not marketable. You see, a little over a year ago, I nearly died from pneumonia. I was hospitalized for 3 weeks, surgery, the works. I got out on Christmas Eve, barely able to walk, all my strength gone. Now, the clean version, the marketable version of that story would be really easy to tell. I could say I nearly died, that I had a momentary burst of clarity in that brush with death, that I discovered renewed purpose and saw that AI was the future and that I leapt in with bravery and built SkillSaige because the timing was right. That's the kind of story you would normally hear at a talk like this. But it wouldn't be true. It would be good for a magazine. It would be good for finding investors, for marketing, bite-sized, inspirational, success by nature of the heroic journey, but it would be a lie. SkillSaige was not a lightning strike. It was not a neat little hero's journey, and it was the next step in a much, much longer pattern. I cannot stress the length of that enough, the vast majority of my professional life. Really 15 years of learning from every single system I was in that tried to make me smaller. SkillSaige itself is I guess the best way to describe it would be soft skills training for everyone at an affordable cost. It's free for individual learners, it's per seat, and very affordable for companies. That's not because we have incredible amounts of startup cash subsidizing our costs until we've locked our customers in. It genuinely costs that little for us to run it because it's built with care. We use genuine, actual, animated 3D characters to talk to that can emote, express, and talk with you. But it's also not a chatbot. It can't hallucinate. It can't go off the rails. You can't jailbreak it into potentially harmful behavior. It is there to teach you to be better at any of those difficult, nebulous skills that exist in life and to help you on that journey without any exceptions. I got there by following my path at every step of the way as a mother, as an engineer, as an artist, as, a storyteller. Every random thing I've done over the years has contributed to this. So I don't want to give you the usual founder story because I don't want to sand the edges off until the story becomes meaninglessly inspirational. That doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help me and it doesn't help you. I don't think raw determination solves everything. I mean, really, if it was that easy, would any of you be here to listen? Determination can be helpful, yeah, but what matters a lot more, in my experience, is distress tolerance, and specifically emotional distress tolerance. What I mean by that is the thing you develop when the systems around you have failed to provide enough slack, enough space for you. Something I suspect many of us have all been familiar with to varying degrees. Let's define that a little further for a moment. I'm not talking about the ability to tolerate superficial distress like pain or externalized sorrow or fear, the kind of thing we feel when we watch a horror movie or, go in and read some harrowing journey someone went through that wraps up with a neat little bow. That doesn't ask anything of us. It puts us on the edge of the seat, and then it puts us back on our way and says, don't worry, it all wrapped up nice. Go on with your day. It doesn't ask us to think about the real costs involved. What I'm talking about is the deep, dissonant distress, the kind that comes when we examine our deepest weaknesses, our deepest fears, and discomforts. And often the right path, the truly right one, requires being in very close proximity to that kind of distress over and over and over again. How much will vary from person to person, from journey to journey. most people will run from it. And learning to listen to it, to grow from it, to live alongside it comes only from being pressed into positions of distress like that, and then standing firm in your discomfort without wavering and inviting learning and growth and change. And that's where SkillSaige came from, not from a place of abundance, but of constraint. And there's nothing magical about constraint. It will just as soon crush you as make you stronger. It's how you use it that matters. So let's talk about the false founder story for a second. It's a comforting lie the tech industry in particular loves to tell, but it's not unique to any form of entrepreneurship. These days, it seems like the only thing that matters. The truth is, industry, and tech, again, in particular, loves a story it can package and sell: a crisis, a breakthrough, a brave leap, a clear win. A founder who sacrifices all in the service of vision, but not like in a genuinely uncomfortable or upsetting way. Just a little risk, just enough seasoning for the story. We're very good at compressing real human lives down into something that can be used to sell whatever the current hype cycle is. The degree to which it holds up to scrutiny is largely irrelevant. It's actually undesirable in most cases because it doesn't hold up. The emotional impact is the thing that counts, but only in the short term. We turn people into brands. We turn pain into positioning. We turn complexity into a 3-act structure with a pitch deck at the end. Buy in or miss out on this genius arc that's inevitable. And we all know that's not actually how life works at all. Don't get me wrong, it would have been strategically advantageous for me to show up today perpetuating that lie. I could have come here in a black turtleneck and pushed some narrative that makes me look like a genius, hoping to grab the eye of an investor through a grapevine. But life is so much messier than that, and building anything of value, real human value, is messier than that. Parenting is so much messier than that. The real story of SkillSaige is not that I was struck by inspiration and then everything aligned. It's that I kept finding myself pushed out of systems that honestly did not know what to do with me. Every time that happened, I had to decide whether I was going to shrink to fit the system or learn from it, grow, and make a choice to build something different. But without knowing how long that road would be. And that's the story I want to tell you today, if you'll indulge me, not because it's pretty or inspirational or the right strategic move for the brand, but because it's real and vulnerable and includes the details that are left out of success stories. And that specifically, I think, is what can be most useful to you, not because your path will look the same as mine, but because I want to encourage you to go back and look at your own journey, your own history, and find those things that you've discarded because you've been told by systems that they aren't valuable, that they aren't going to help you. I don't think that is true in most cases. So, I am, first and foremost, a mother to my kids. And I don't say that to diminish myself. It does not define me as a person. It doesn't make up my whole identity. It's a role I chose, and it's one I love. It's one I celebrate, but it doesn't come without challenges. It is not something I probably need to explain to any of the women what it's like to be underestimated in the professional sphere, especially in tech. People assume someone else did your work, and if you have confidence, it means arrogance. But if it was coming from a man, it would mean competence. People assume that if you're a professional and creative, one of those things must be a lie. If you're in tech, it's probably the technical side. And if you're not, it's probably the creative side. If you have children, there is this additional assumption sitting underneath everything, that your career is secondary now because you've compromised, that you are less available, less ambitious, less serious. And I say people who believe that have never actually listened to a mother. My children did not make me less driven. It crystallized my drive into something genuinely unstoppable. We all know Merida's Mother the Bear. That wasn't picked, because it's fun and poetic. It's coming from something genuine. Nothing has driven me more than wanting to provide for my kids and love them well and be present for them and, most importantly, give them a better life than I had as a child. But, and this is the breaking point, the sticking point for a lot of systems, I do not mean that in a purely material or financial way. I want them to grow up seeing that you can care deeply and still build meaningful things that you can refuse to disappear into a life that does not fit you and yet still succeed. That survival is not the same thing as surrender. So my drive might be unyielding, but it comes with a condition. The work I do has to actually return enough to support that life for them. And there are no exceptions to that. It has to provide. It has to leave room to parent. It has to leave room for me to be there when my children need me. It has to recognize that the spreadsheet is, in fact, not actually the whole point. And that means optimizing for income sometimes, but also presence, safety, flexibility, stability, and the ability to be the kind of mother my children need in all parts. Often, that's looked like playing chess with half the pieces missing. It clashes hard with the vast majority of corporate culture because corporate systems are so good at measuring little performances of dedication. They can measure hours, they can measure availability on Slack, they can measure how willing you are to contort yourself around somebody else's idea of seriousness. But genuine dedication is a lot harder to track. Okay, no, it's not, but it takes a lot more effort and care. It forces people to look at who you actually are as a person, as an individual, and not just how you appear in their spreadsheet. Real dedication is doing work that matters for people who matter. With enough honesty to keep improving, it requires care and judgment and a willingness to question the system instead of just performing loyalty to it. And that often means emotional discomfort, pain, and isolation. And that's where that distress tolerance comes in. My kids are the driving force behind what I do, but more importantly, they're the reason why I do what I do the way I do it. I will not teach them that performing loyalty is something to ever aspire to. So I mentioned earlier that constraints drove the development of SkillSaige, and being a mother had a lot to do with that. There are naturally parts of my story that I don't really discuss publicly because my children are involved, and there are parts I don't discuss publicly because not every true thing belongs on a stage. Not every true thing should immediately be looked at as, how can we benefit from this? How can we market it? But the important part for this is, after my divorce, I found myself in a set of systems that were technically functioning, mostly, but practically absolutely devastating. Legal systems, tax systems, employment systems, funding systems, family systems, professional networks. Every single one assumed a level of stability or surplus that I did not have. Each one assumed I had slack to work with. Slack in finances, slack in schedule, slack in our emotional lives, slack in professional networks, slack in our ability to take risks without immediately endangering the people who depend on us. Currency that we can spend in 1,000 invisible ways to prop up each of these systems in their shortcomings and thereby participate in them. I bring this up because I want you to know I've never really been in a position of abundance, not to get your sympathy or empathy, but to get you to think critically. Is that thing that you assume to be a deal breaker in your own life, in your own goals, actually a deal breaker? Is it actually going to stand in your way? Or is there a weird, roundabout, unusual, atypical, and often slower way to get there in spite of it? I had high fixed obligations, unstable work, children who needed me, a professional world that kept rewarding people who already had the connections, the credibility, and the room to fail. If I wanted to be there for my kids or to function at all, I had to keep making decisions that looked really inefficient on paper, and that was distressing. Even though paper is bad at measuring what's actually at stake in life, it's also what we're told is the most important in a lot of these systems. It doesn't account, though, for the weird edge-of-the-system failures that technically shouldn't exist, but they very much do. I often wound up on the slower path because the faster path would have made me less available to my kids, less well-rounded in my potential, if it would have worked at all. Evidence says it would not have. And then what would I have had? All of that, in all its wide-ranging, messy complexity, is why SkillSaige exists. You can't extricate any part of it from the journey. Once you've lived inside that kind of pressure, you start seeing how many professional systems are designed for people who already have room to breathe, and how many depend on people not bothering to look closer at where things don't make sense. because they don't need to. So all of these systems set the stage for my creation of SkillSaige, and I can't honestly tell you how I started the company without talking about how I got here. I'm going to give you a very abridged version because, of course, it's infinitely more complicated than that. You can't boil down 15 years of experience into 45 minutes. That's not a real thing. But you also can't separate me and my journey from the thing I made, nor can you from anything you want to do. If you're going to make something that's genuinely successful, that can last, it has to come from you in your whole self directly. I should be clear about the journey, too. I wasn't trying to have it all. I was just rejecting what the mainstream story kept describing as the goal. And this is also the part of the story where people misunderstand what I built and why. SkillSaige, it required a lot. Product engineering, game design, character work, writing, learning design, back-end systems, web, marketing, AI architecture. And in the beginning, I had to touch a frankly unreasonable amount of it myself. Not because I thought that was the ideal way to build a company. A lot of funders, though, a lot of them start with capital, co-founders, advisors, or a network that gives them credibility and access to capital and funds before the product even exists. And I had none of that. So instead, I used every single one of the wide-ranging skills I had gathered over my very weird career to manufacture the credibility I had not been given. Sometimes what looks like exceptional versatility is actually adaptation to exclusion. And that's a very important distinction. I don't think something should be lionized or mythicized just because it looks versatile. I think rather that should be an invitation to curiosity. Why was that versatility even necessary? That shouldn't be. I don't think a company should be dependent on one person carrying everything. I don't think that's noble. And as I said, I don't subscribe to the myth of the auteur, the genius, the innovator. I actually think there are a few myths in our society that are more dangerous and damaging. Creation is always collaboration, and that can take many forms, both passive and active. Yes, it can be direct co-work, but creation is also collaboration through our inspiration, both past and present. You shouldn't avoid imperfect solutions just because they're imperfect. If you want to break a system or bend it or climb outside it, it's always going to take a lot. In the broader VC startup world, that a lot is usually substituted with an excess of capital to burn. And if you don't have that, it's got to come from somewhere else. So you have to use what you've got. If you're in a place where I can work hard and a lot, then just know that you can diffuse the danger of that situation, no matter how imperfect it is, by going into it clear-eyed about the risks. No one is immune to any dangers. No one is immune from making any mistakes. The moment you think you are is the moment you put yourself in genuine danger. Me, charging in by myself, was imperfect, but it got SkillSaige to a place where it was real and tangible. And critically, the point was never to keep the company dependent on me, to demand the same dedication of others at some point. The point was to build enough proof that other people could see it, challenge it, and then strengthen it, and then finally benefit from it. When belief is not extended to you, proof has to come first. And that sucks. But it's never worth fighting with reality because, frankly, reality always wins in the end. So you have to work within its limits. Its limits just might not be where you've been told that they are. Okay, so all of this. You are also now probably wondering how on earth I could wear so many hats, because that seems insane. So to explain that, I need to go back a bit. In college, I studied electrical engineering at CSU with an emphasis on processor systems. I was very good at it. It was also pretty apparent by junior year that I did not care about the work, and I did not get along with the students in the program. They were not my people. So I made my first big leap. I trained as a concept artist and earned a BFA. I studied writing whenever I could because that was what I really wanted to do, tell stories. This is some of my art I've made throughout my career. But I learned pretty early on that you can't simply declare yourself a novelist and pay rent, at least not without a whole lot of industry family connections that, again, the myth of the auteur author often loves to conveniently leave out. I had a grand total of 0 connections. Engineering could have paid the bills, but it was deeply lifeless to me because it had no outlet for my artistic side. So I settled on concept art, specifically the act of designing elements of any kind of a production before the real production happens, to save time and money and make crucial decisions early and effectively. To me, it seemed like a balance of storytelling and my technical discipline. So my hope was someday I would lock into getting some writing experience as part of it, and then maybe someday I could come back to writing. I knew that if I was not going to yield on being myself, though, I had to become really flexible really fast. So I wouldn't let myself become smaller by refusing to learn new skills, by pinning all my hopes on one discipline or narrative. And in fact, a few months out of college, I actually made it to a third-round interview with the Lego company. They flew me out to Denmark, and I hadn't been to Billund, where their headquarters are, since my 7th birthday as a kid. It was surreal to be back there, but now interviewing to join the team I had idolized as a child as a concept artist. Lego was truly everything to me as a kid. But in the interview, I asked what I thought was a very reasonable question given the journey I had set out on. How do you support cross-discipline growth and development among team members to promote better collaboration? Naturally, you would want people to understand what their colleagues are doing. How else will you make things that they can use effectively? I have never been in a more awkwardly silent room in my life. There were 3 interviewers in that room in the biggest, supposedly creative company in the world. Not one of them had an answer for that question. I eventually got a very confused version of, well, we don't really do that from each. But that was the moment I realized something that has stayed with me ever since. A dream, as lovely as it can still ask you to become smaller to realize it. Dreams are not always the biggest, truest version of yourself. It didn't make Lego bad. It just meant that the version of me that would have to exist there was not the whole version of me. And that was not what I wanted for myself, and it was not what I wanted to teach my daughter, who was not even 3 at the time. So I took a job at a tech CEO startup incubator instead, which turned out to be one of the most valuable things I ever did, and also one of the absolute worst. So at the incubator, I got a front row seat to the tech world, but not the polished version, the real one. Ego-driven, messy, wasteful. Oh sure, there are some brilliant parts in there, I won't deny that. Improvisation, efficiency, moments when someone sees a problem clearly and builds something out of scraps. But there are so many moments that bury all of those by sheer mass, made up of people building entire projects out of momentum and narrative, and no one being willing to admit that the center of the whole thing is missing and that there is no point to what you are building. My official role was rooted in art and storytelling. I was a concept artist at a startup incubator. To this day, I don't know why they thought they needed that. But my background was so much broader than that, because I had engineering training, and I could program in a few languages, not well, but well enough, and I could write. I could think in systems. I could translate between disciplines. So while there, I worked a bunch of different jobs. I worked with their sister company's Survey Gizmo's marketing department on the regular, sort of a marketing communications assassin. My multi-tool nature became invaluable in expanding and filling gaps in their team. For 5 years, they had like 3 of these robots that made up their entire brand. I drew over 120 of them to turn it into a massive clip art library that they could leverage going forward. Why a $300 million company with 10 people in the marketing department had no illustrators for their illustration-heavy brand? Not sure, but we don't ask those questions. I also developed flagship motion graphics and ad campaigns as the company pushed further into enterprise. Internally, I worked on countless very doomed startup ideas, always there to visualize, to research, to document, which became critical because I was willing to do the work. No one else was. And I learned a lot about everything from SaaS development to sales cycles to customer personas. And I learned by being useful and building, yes, but also watching what broke without volunteering to fix it. Just letting it happen. I never said no. I said, yes, but, or yes, but let's avoid a lot. And few things would ever end up being as valuable as that. Because years later, when I started SkillSaige, I wasn't starting from a vague idea of what a software company maybe should be. I had literally seen every part of a functioning machine. Dysfunctional in places, sure, but still functioning. I had seen where it worked and where it hadn't. And I had seen just how often those moments where it didn't work actually telegraphed themselves from miles away if you could view the whole situation without an ego, without an attachment to what was coming of your own self-worth and your own self-identity. I had seen how much of business is just storytelling, the thing I loved. How much of product development is actually just empathy. Empathy for the people you're designing for, empathy for the people you're working with. And how much dysfunction actually gets protected, not because it's inevitable, because it's mistaken for seriousness or legacy. None of this would have happened if I had stayed boxed into the idea that I was just a concept artist, objecting every time the CEO asked me to do something absurd, like document the sales pipeline or research the possibility of a movie theater Disney-grade walkthrough attraction. No, he hadn't thought to Google the cost of this prior to assigning me the task. That's okay, I did it for him. I turned it into an art project. It was super fun. It did not get made. It turns out this would be an unbelievably expensive venture and no one should do it. But I had fun. And I realized through it all that I did not have to be defined by my skills. Each skill was just another tool. Concept art was a tool. Systems engineering was a tool. Writing was a tool. The real skill was learning how to move between them all without letting them define me. I'm actually not particularly exceptional at any of my skills. It's just that I see how they fit together. I attach no ego to a particular way of doing things, to a particular level of skill that I might perceive myself at. I love nothing more than finding someone who is better than me at anything I can do. It makes it sparks excitement and curiosity, not fear or threat or a sense of envy, but I had to learn that too. Being great as a single thing is it's fine. If you fit into a neat box within some massive company, there's already a slot for you, and you have funds and resources to burn on whatever pursuit feeds your self-image, but I've never been good at fitting into those predefined systems. I will never be a world-class master painter, or a software engineer, or a writer, but I'm okay with that, because that's not who I am. So, how do you get from artist and omnidirectional problem solver at a harebrained startup incubator to technical founder and CEO of an AI SaaS company? Not in a straight line. To paraphrase a certain witch I love, you want a straight line, you should probably ask a straight lady. Personally, I excel at weird, curvy, decidedly not straight lines. The next major opportunity did not arrive as a clean invitation. It was patently absurd, messy on its face from minute one. You see, there was this desire to build a game studio. Most people in tech have that desire. And there was a lot of energy and a lot of ambition, but there was no understanding of what building a game studio actually required by the people involved. So they asked me to solve those things. I had done freelance work for games before. I could touch most parts of the pipeline reasonably well, but none of the games I had ever worked on made it to market. Whole separate issue we won't get into. But jumping from that to build an entire game studio for me is an insane leap. But it's where my strange combination of skills started to become useful in a new way. I could do a little bit of story, I could do a little bit of art. I understood enough engineering to know when something was real and when it was hand-waving, or at the very least to go find someone who could figure that out and ask them. I understood enough product and business to know that a creative project still needs structure. And I could, after all, code well enough, which you need to make video games. I was not the best at any of these things. I want to come back to that. But I had really started to understand how they fit together, so I could make choices that played to the areas I was strongest in and avoid or hide all the areas I was weak in or under-resourced, to let my creativity start to come from my constraints. So I want to show you something to prove this point. This is Bass and Noda. They are the protagonists of the game Reliquary. I drew this art. I designed them. What you're not seeing here is the 78 iterations these characters went through to look like this. I did not sit down one day and illustrate this. Every single piece of this is not some impenetrable work of art, but a series of very careful decisions as I looked honestly at what I could do and what I could not, all the way from the start of the game design process to the end, and picked things that worked with that. I sucked at portraits. But I was kind of okay with sculptural surfaces, so I invented a world populated by synthetic beings and gave them each unique masks that could look hand-carved and emotive. I could not animate hands and arms to save my life. And I didn't have the resources to hire someone who could, so they don't have arms. They have psychic crystals and are powerful magic wielders. Feet are really hard to animate on a technical level, so I leaned into agile, pointed metal legs that feel advanced and dangerous and not Sayre has no idea how to animate video game feet. BAS is the consequence of 100 incidents of me working with my constraints and limits rather than fighting against them. Thinking ahead with intention and then accepting the limits of my reality rather than getting lost in daydreams and then being shocked when they inevitably come crashing down. I took the opportunity to bring her to life even though I saw it was a long shot. And I learned an incredible amount over those years, even though the work was complicated and exhausting, and as much interpersonal diplomacy with the funder, trying to keep him happy, as it was the genuine technical work every step of the way. I went into it knowing it would have an almost guaranteed likelihood of collapse before the work could be completed. It was clearly under-resourced. That wasn't the end. What happened? But going into it grounded on the limitations of the situation put me in a position to plan for how to salvage the project when that happened. I wasn't taken by surprise. I was ready for it. I kept the rights for myself, and it will still see the light of day at some point. I got to learn a lot of really hard lessons about what happens when vision and funding and leadership and execution don't align with reality. But the lesson I carried forward was not that ambition is bad. It's that ambition without structure or genuine, sustainable passion or appropriate resources commensurate to the scope of the ambition will devour people without exception. And SkillSaige comes from wanting both things, a meaningful vision and a very humane way to build it. So, as I said before, SkillSaige came from noticing something I could not stop seeing everywhere through my entire life. Professional growth is often reserved for people who already have the things professional growth is supposed to create in the first place. Miss a rung, and the next is twice as hard to start on. And there's no going back. Miss two, and it gets even worse. Confidence, time, money, mentorship, room to fail, room to practice, room to recover. A lot of people do not have that, myself included. A lot of people need to learn communication, self-advocacy, leadership, conflict, interviews, negotiation, boundaries, all while they're already under pressure. Their life did not fit the clean narrative that the system expects them to follow. But that doesn't mean they're not capable of participating in it. They just need a different or slightly unusual path to their success. And they need all this while they're tired or caregiving, while they're recovering from systems that did not protect them, while they're trying to prove they belong in rooms that were never built with them in mind. Existing systems do not serve those people well. Even if you have a job or run a company, 1 or 2 seminars a year is honestly not going to do you any good for your personal growth. They work really well for compliance measurements and measures of performed loyalty and seriousness, but not for genuinely building skills day after day. And if you don't even work somewhere that deigns to invest in that, forget it. We tell people to be more confident, but we don't give them safe places to practice confident. We don't allow people to learn how to communicate better until the stakes are already real. We tell people to advocate for themselves, and then we punish them when they do it imperfectly or in a way that is unexpected by the system. We tell people leadership is a skill, but then we distribute the leadership development to the people who have already been identified and selected as leaders by the system itself. And I don't think it's an accident that so many AI products right now are obsessed with pursuing the pipe dream of an omniscient chatbot that can replace the under-resourced people with digital, mindless, sycophantic yes men. I think honestly that a chatbot is actually the last thing an LLM should be used for. It is deeply irresponsible and ignores very real risks and dangers that we have known technologies like that pose since the 70s. When they're applied recklessly, the harm is real and it cannot be waved away. But in this narrow-minded obsession that the tech culture has right now, an obsession driving it to attempt to brute force the shortest path to perceived mass wealth on a frankly unrealistic scale, I think it's actually overlooking a huge, incredible host of unbelievable opportunities that are safer, better, more valuable long-term, but which will each require repeated, careful, thoughtful work and development to explore by people who actually understand the problem they're working on. So there's a really big gap out there, both in the resources that those outside the system have, but also in the ways in which those inside the system are able to even perceive the value of something like an LLM. That gap is SkillSaige. I'm not interested in building another tool for people who already have every advantage, nor am I interested in building another chatbot wrapper capable of addicting people. I want to build something for people trying to grow without enough slack. I want to do something I care about, because my background crosses games, storytelling, art, software, business. I'm uniquely positioned to juggle all those things that you're not supposed to be able to do, but supposed to doesn't matter in a position like mine, or like yours, I suspect, in between all the systems that sit there and define what supposed to is. You see, at the end of the day, building something that people will use is, like I said, a process of storytelling, and storytelling requires empathy. Good work involves a million stories that come together to form one single story, but then that story gets to go on and become part of a million others, and you don't get to control that, and that is okay. And that is why SkillSaige exists. In the beginning, it had to be built lean. I had to use every discipline I had. If that sounds like a lot of work, it was. When my kids were home, I was there to take care of them and help with their homework. Like I said, Sage is built in a game engine because that's what those tools exist for, expressiveness. But we are also a full SaaS company with all the language and trappings of what is expected of that, because you can't convince people to operate in a different system. You can offer them something they're looking for with something better underneath. When my kids were at school, or when Eve was sleeping, I was working. It was a long, long period of putting them first, because I had made this choice, and they did not deserve to be impacted by it. Hey, there's that valuable emotional distress tolerance I mentioned before. Frankly, I think the fact that I had to do a little bit of everything made a better product. Like I said, Sage now has moods, goals, objectives, and can shut down a conversation if you try to mess with her. And all of it can be set up to teach or practice any soft skill in quite literally less effort than filling out a D&D character sheet. Again, I dove in to tackle all this not because it was sustainable or because I wanted to be the sole founder. I did it because it was the only path available to me. But I didn't do it because that seemed incredible or valuable. I only did enough to make it stop being an idea, to make the argument visible, just enough to make it incontrovertible to the smallest possible pool of people so that I could then invite them in and begin to work with them. Sometimes the first job of a founder is to create enough proof that belief can finally attach to something. And that's not fair if you don't have resources, but it's real. And like I said, fighting with reality, you don't win, ever. So if you want to be the founder, you have to be unafraid of challenge, not external challenges, but challenge to yourself, discomfort for yourself. Your job is not to push it onto everyone around you to make others suffer the way you suffered, but to be willing to take that into yourself, to guard others, to build something better that prevents them from being affected in the way you were. But only long enough for others to join you. So, what did SkillSaige teach me? A lot, but not that anyone can just do this if they try hard enough. I think that's too easy to say, and frankly, it's cruel. It normalizes a terrible system that hand waves away failure as, well, you just didn't try hard enough, you just didn't grind. In reality, winners often have nothing to do with trying hard in a literal sense, and everything in a performative sense. My path has been difficult, but I've also been wildly fortunate at the things I even fell backwards into that I could synthesize into SkillSaige. The only reason I could was because I did not reject any of my experiences about being outside my vision of myself. I looked for something that could use all of them. Constraint can be genuinely valuable, but only if you choose to use it. Second, boundaries are everything, and setting them up starts long before they become necessary. Many people will be impressed by you, no matter what you do, if you set out to do something on your own, if you set out to be a founder. That's impressive. Most people can't even start on that path. But just as many people will want to take from you because you are impressive, to extract. Sometimes it will be overt. They will demand performative loyalty, dedication. They will ask for free work in the name of collaboration. But sometimes it will be a lot more subtle. Mindless consuming of your time and energy with hollow enthusiasm that is not backed up by genuine action and effort. You are valuable. What you're doing is valuable, whatever it is. You can't protect it if you don't believe that. So you need to be grounded and empathetic and look for the genuine helpers and collaborators. They're hard to find, but they exist. Third, one of the deadliest toxins to your efforts and your company as a whole will be ego, your own and that of others in equal measure. Baseless, self-inflated worth that comes from tying your personal sense of identity to the work that you do. Be proud of your work. Be proud of your skills. That is essential. But do not lose sight of the fact that work is just that. It's work. It's not you. It never will be. Skills are tools. They are not identity. They can always be improved and grown and honed and used in ways you never expected. So be open to it. And finally, like I mentioned, when belief is not extended to you, proof has to come first. This is not inspirational. It's just real. There's no level of capability that will afford you the comforts, resources, and shortcuts with those who have connections or in-group belonging. No level of effort will force others to prioritize you over their own comforts or safety or ability to avoid distress. Some people have to build more before they're believed at all. Some of us have to build a lot more. And that's not fair, but it's real. If you're in that position, the answer is not to pretend the system is fair. The answer is to understand the system clearly enough that you can decide where to spend your energy and where to stop asking for permission from it. Find the gaps and slip through. So I don't want to leave you with the idea that hardship is noble. That is not the point. I don't believe that. It can be valuable if you let it, but ultimately the best success is the one that comes from you explicitly, not from you emulating someone else, but from your story. Every single part of it that you're willing to learn from. That's what SkillSaige is for me. It's not a clean version of the story, but it's very real, and it's driven by my love for the people that matter most to me, my kids. I started SkillSaige as a single mom because I had to build from where I actually was. Not the founder story people like to hear, from a gap, from the chessboard missing more than half the pieces, and from the refusal to let any of it make me smaller. Because that's what I want my kids to learn as they grow up, not anything else.